This show is brought to you by Betkoza, an opportunity for you to make a little bit of money. Welcome to the Fut-Afrique channel, where every single week you and I get to talk about all things rugby. As a South African rugby fan, I'm sure that you're smiling from ear to ear. The Springboks did it. They made it through to the semi-final by just a single point. We'll be chatting all about the Rugby World Cup, but before we talk about the Rugby World Cup, we know that our local rugby teams, the Sharks, the Stormers, the Lions, and the Bulls will be competing in the third season of the United Rugby Championship. To discuss all of these things, I'm joined by David Midgely, a man who absolutely loves his sport, and also a man who loves the Springboks. And I've got one important question that I want to ask him about the officiating that we saw this past weekend. David, how are you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me once again, Aaron.
Thank you so much for joining us again. Before we talk about the action that we saw on the field of play, I want to find out from you, where are you enjoying the rugby games? Because I'm chilling at the fan parks. Are you at home enjoying a nice braai?
Thankfully, I'm involved in digital radio commentary, so that brings me a little bit closer to the game to be able to bring fans, radio commentary online.
Is it as stressful as what it is at the fan parks, where the fans are like quiet for most of the game, especially that game against France? Or is it a lot more lively in studio?
I think you take on the energy of the game. You can see it, we don't necessarily have the audio straight from the game, but it's certainly one that you can feel the energy from a stadium. And going into that game how the crowd and the teams are going to reply because of the sense of the occasion.
Definitely. We have to talk about the United Rugby Championship before we talk about the Rugby World Cup. Let's talk about the third season that lies ahead. Some would say that the Stormers will be a team that will be in the final yet again. Do you share that sentiment?
Well, I'd certainly hope so. We want South African teams to do well on the stage that they've set themselves, and they want to continue along that path. So success for South African sides by all means.
Definitely. I want us to talk about this URC and what it means for South African rugby teams to now compete with teams in the Northern Hemisphere. We know that Super Rugby is a thing of the past. We now have this new competition where South Africans are doing quite well. Is that the success of the Springboks, or just the fact that South African rugby is that great?
I think it's something to look at holistically and not just iron out one or two of those creases that you may have shown us. For me, this is almost a way in which we can understand the minds of Northern Hemisphere referees outside of a Rugby World Cup, because it's not all that often that we interact with some of the French referees or the English referees in this environment. Maybe once every second year we'll have an outgoing tour to the UK and to Europe itself. And so it gives us an opportunity to really understand where they want to drive the game and how they see the game, but also, crucially, it's opportunity to see some of our competitors from the Northern Hemisphere playing in those competitions. So it really is an opportunity for us to suss out what's going on up north.
You spoke about the referees there. I've got a few questions lined up for you regarding the officiating this past weekend, but I want us to talk about rumors that have been brewing for quite some time. The Springboks possibly playing in the Six Nations. Is that something that's been on your radar? Is that something that's a possibility, at least in your mind? And also, is that something that you actually want to see happen?
It's a challenge that South Africa has had for a while with SANZAAR. The relationship has been diminishing over the last couple of years, and it's something that they'll hope to continue, but if need be, it may be an opportunity for the South Africans to play in Six Nations. I don't know if the other Six Nations teams will be excited for it. I think they're more interested in a second tier with Romania and Georgia and Portugal, maybe kind of finding their way into a Division 2 along with Spain perhaps. So maybe there's a way in which they can have promotion relegation. South Africa, in their involvement at Rugby Championship, could look to perhaps involve teams like Fiji or Samoa. The challenge is always logistics. With all of these competitions, there's cost involved with traveling either to the Oceania side of the world or up north to Europe. So they have to weigh up the cost and the benefit to the involvement in those competitions.
Most certainly. You talk about the cost implications. Let's talk about the success. Let's leave the money to one side.
Sure.
I want to focus on the Stormers. The Stormers won the first edition of the United Rugby Championship, and then they were beaten in the final by Munster earlier this year.
Yes.
What are the Stormers doing right?
I think it's a balance of youth and experience. They've given opportunities to players to play in their own style within the brand of Stormers Rugby. I think crucially for them, they are utilising the Springboks that they do have well and asking for their senior leadership in the change room to excite the youngsters to get involved in the game, but also utilising the opportunity for somebody like Amani Libbok to shine at URC for a couple of seasons and then get the call up to the Springboks when Andre Pollard was injured, and then we had Elton Jantjies out of the reckoning for the squad.
You spoke about opportunities there. The one thing that I love about the URC is opportunities, but not just opportunities for the guys that are playing for the Springboks or the guys that are the quote-unquote favorites within a particular squad. Because it's such a long competition, there's a lot of youngsters that have to come through the system. Are you happy with what we're seeing in terms of the youngsters that are being produced, but also the youngsters that get to travel with the team and also get to compete at the highest level?
Absolutely. I mean, you think of the South African team, the Springboks, their average age is well into the 30s in this World Cup. We're one of the older sides at the World Cup. And I think that's a positivity, well, it's a positive aspect for the South African selectors to look at, because if guys perform at this level, at URC level, they have an opportunity really now to cement post-Rugby World Cup 2023 their space in the side, because there's guys that have been there and thereabouts. I think of a guy like Evan Ruiz, who's not really been able to cement a place behind Dwayne Vermeulen and Jasper de Visser. He has had a couple of Springbok games, and Jean-Luc Dupré is another one who comes to mind. It's an opportunity for him to say, actually, you know what, this is my time to kind of fight my way into that squad. You look at Sanela Nohamba from the Lions, who also did well for the Lions, but had an opportunity with the SAA side. Is he going to be involved in the side post-2023 World Cup? Well, it depends on how he performs this season. There's certainly a gap there for him to make a claim.
I want us to shift our focus to the fixtures that lie ahead for this weekend as we start the third season of the United Rugby Championship. We've got a competition that we like to run on the show, somewhat of a betting competition. Of course, as you know, the show is brought to you by Betcoza. So for the first round, let's talk about the United Rugby Championship, the fixtures that lie ahead this weekend, right? I want to give you a kitty of just 500 Rand.
Okay.
Right? Heading into this weekend.
Yes.
The first game, some would say it's the warm-up before we watch the Springboks playing later on at 9 o'clock.
Yes.
That's the Lions taking on the Stormers, a team that some would say is also like the favorites to make it to the final again, pardon me. How much would you put on this particular game, and which team is taking it?
So I think you've got to look at both sides, knowing that they are absent, their Springboks, and then you've got to say, well, who is able to perform? I think continuity for the Lions is crucial, because they don't have as many guys pulled out of their side playing for the Springboks, and they don't have as much disruption with guys going off to Springbok camps and coming back. So you might favour the Lions if you're a Joburg fan, but I think the Stormers, with their depth and quality, they've got to be able to come out with a win at the end of it.
How much are you putting on this particular encounter?
I'd probably, if the 500 out of all games, maybe 300 Rand on the Stormers.
Because it's a given result.
I don't think it's a given result. There's no such thing, I don't think, but not in the URC. But I do think that the confidence that they would have had, having played 2 finals in a row, it's the excitement that they have will certainly get them over the line.
Let's shift to the second game that we are seeing on Saturday. On Saturday at 6:15, it will be the Sharks that will be traveling away to take on Munster, defending champions. One needs to add as well. But also looking at that touring squad, a lot of South Africans would have picked up one name, Aphiwe Jantjie. The Sharks have given him an opportunity to now play again, which is quite exciting. Your thoughts when you saw his name on the team sheet?
You know, when he went away from the game, I think we were worried as South African fans, and rightfully so. I mean, you know, his involvement in the build-up to Rugby World Cup 2019 was valuable, and particularly in that win of the Rugby Championship in 2019. It's one that excites me. I think now that he's aged, maybe he's able to come in with a bit of maturity to his game and really step up to that next level to make sure that he wants to be a part of the plans for Rassie Erasmus in the time going beyond Rugby World Cup 2023. And I think his absence from the game was sorely missed, but South African fans know that it gave a guy like Kurtley Arendse an opening in the door, and Kanan Moody as well. So we're blessed, I think, as South Africans with the amount of talent we have.
Most certainly. You've got 200 Rand left in your kitty for the United Rugby Championship this weekend. This specific game, how much are you putting on this one?
50 Rand. I would put, I mean, look, with all credit.
Conservative bet.
Yeah, with all credit to the Sharks, I think the old Irish War Dogs of Munster are just something special. They also will have the luxury of some of their island players possibly coming back because of their early exit. So I think a side that went to the World Cup and did as well as Ireland did was majority Munster. And then they're coming back into the fold. Maybe they'll take a little bit of rest, but I think there may be an opportunity for Munster to really just put the Sharks to the sword.
Definitely. Also looking at that Springbok squad, I'm talking about a player like Jean Klein, a player like Ergie Snyman. I mean, their success also helped the Springboks a little bit as well, one has to admit.
Yeah, Jean Klein is actually now the Irish international who's been the furthest in a Rugby World Cup after he picked up 5 caps for Ireland way back when. But, those two as a pairing have also been crucial to the South African success at Rugby World Cup, not only on the field, but in their preparation each week.
Most certainly. The last game for the South African contingency at least, we are seeing the Bulls at their fortress, Loftus, taking on the Scarlets, Sunday at 3 o'clock. How much money are you putting on this game and why?
I've got to put the rest of the money all in. All in on this one. It's the Bulls at home. Jake White is a phenomenal coach. He's a Rugby World Cup winning coach. He likes to also throw a bit of spice into these press conferences. So I think he'll want to get underway with a victory, and he knows that he'll be able to fire up his men at the home of Bulls Rugby.
Talking about the Bulls, we have to at least mention some of the signings that they've got this season. The Bulls have never been shy to sign big name players. I mean, Willie Leroux will be joining their squad after the Rugby World Cup. Are you anticipating that the Bulls could be a lot more competitive this season and win more trophies?
I certainly hope so. I think it's you don't want it a one-sided affair from the South Africans where it's one side dominating. But the value of Willie Leroux, whether or not South Africa win this World Cup, is going to be an indelible mark on Bulls Rugby. Like you mentioned, they've always been excited to bring in the experienced talent whilst nurturing the youth. And for me, Willie Leroux, I think he's somebody that has changed the way that the Springboks attack. And I also think that his ability to assist, his ability to read the game, I think he's the leading try assist for South Africa in the last 10 years. And that just elevates the guys around him. It allows him to tell the story of his journey and perhaps to inspire the next generation.
Most certainly. Let's shift the conversation to the big one. I think this one will be juicy, let's call it that, because there's so much for us to talk about, specifically the officiating. Let's move on to the Rugby World Cup quarterfinals that we saw this past weekend that had a few South Africans biting their nails towards the end of that particular encounter against France. But let's start off with the first quarterfinal that we saw. Argentina surprising Wales, because many of us would have put money on Wales as a given result. What did Argentina do right on the day?
Remember, Argentina play in Rugby Championship, and the titans that they play against, with all credit to them, they came to the party on the day. They knew that Wales was a side that had been struggling a little bit leading into Rugby World Cup. They got hammered by the Springboks, and I think they felt maybe this was an opportunity for them to sneak in the back door. But that Argentinian side, remember, they've got experience on the bench. You think of a guy like Augustin Karevi, who's the most capped Argentinian player of all time. That kind of energy coming off the bench is what wins games. These games at this level, quarterfinal and semi-final of Rugby World Cup, is won in the last 20 minutes. That's an easy one to kind of note, and that's also why, if you look at the Springbok bench, why they've gone with the changes that they have in the last 2 games.
Yes, certainly. I want to focus on Argentina and take you back to that famous victory against the All Blacks. Do you think we could see a surprise in the semi-finals, or is that a done deal, something of the past?
My heart wants to say yes. I want the underdog to win. I want it to be an upset, to compete with any upset that we've seen in the past. I don't know if they'll be able to keep up the pace and momentum of the All Black side. Remember, the All Blacks came in struggling. There was doubts. There was questions about Ian Foster's career being over with the All Blacks. But they just switched it on after that France game and really have just put anyone in their path to the side and without much stress.
Talking about anyone, I'm sure you are referring to a particular team, a team that many would have put a lot of money on heading into that quarterfinal encounter against the All Black, the Irish team. What an absolutely phenomenal game of rugby. I sat there and for a second I was like, is this a final? Is it not a final? Like, what's going on? And one would say that the Irish almost lost the game on versatility. They couldn't adapt. Your analysis on where Ireland lost it?
I think there's two things to it. One is a game is not won on paper. A game is won out on the field. Yes, they had done as well as they had, #1 team for so long, but it was in that moment that the All Blacks were able to pull out a victory, because winning knockout rugby is something that is not easily learned. You have to experience it. You can't just watch and see, because Ireland never getting out of a quarter final, that curse continues. It's like our friends in the Cricket World Cup. But they lost in that sense the ability to dig deep in the last 20 minutes, as I said. And they also, like you said, the adaptability. They'd done so well against the Springboks. It's almost as if they'd showed all their cards against the Springboks, and then they forgot about the knockout games to come.
That mental switch that the All Blacks have. There's something about being a Kiwi, being a rugby-loving New Zealand player, that you just have the switch. And they can just adapt in the big moments. We saw them lose against France in that opening game. We saw them lose against the Springboks in that last warm-up encounter ahead of the Rugby World Cup. But from that point, it seems that there's this switch that the players are just switched on. Talk to me about the mental side that we are seeing from the All Blacks, because it just seems like they've got gear number 6, gear number 7 that other teams just don't have.
Yeah. Understanding where they were before the World Cup is crucial. Yes, they lost famously to the Springboks, but they were without some crucial players. There were some injuries during Rugby Championship and that game as well. And going into that game against France, they were a little bit undercooked, if you could call it that. But like you said, they just have this ability, this knack to dig deep, to say that this is the fabric of our nation, rugby is, and we are not going to allow ourselves to pitter out, but rather, if we're going to go down, we're going to go down swinging.
You talk about going down swinging. I have to shift attention to the third quarterfinal that we saw. Fiji, what an absolutely incredible story. We know that the team had done well building up to the Rugby World Cup. I almost believe that Eddie Jones had underestimated what Fiji could do, and that's why we saw them progress to the quarterfinals instead of the Wallabies. And then they took on England, and throughout the game, a part of me started to believe, that Fiji could actually upset England.
Yeah.
Where did it go wrong for Fiji as a team? Because there was a point where it was possible.
Yeah, it comes back to my point, the last 20 minutes. The amount of rugby that somewhat lower nations, I'm not saying tier 2 quite for Fiji, but the teams outside of maybe the top 5, they don't play enough rugby, and they don't play enough rugby against quality opposition. So what happens is that when they get to those moments, they really don't quite know, one, how to tactically shift to put the game to bed, or to make sure that they are fit enough to hit the nail on the head. We saw it against Tonga, South Africa-Tonga, where Tonga gave the South Africans a real run for their money. But again, the back end of the game is where they fell short.
I want to focus on the journey that England has now had to the semi-finals. Comparing them to the Springboks, we've somewhat played 2 finals, quote unquote, one would say. We played against Ireland and we played against the French. And those are big encounters where you actually have to shift into gear number 6, gear number 7. I want to talk about England. England haven't necessarily had a team that actually pushed them to their limits.
Not at all. I think they had the more favourable side of the draw at Rugby World Cup 2023. But you have to make the most of it. You can get a kind draw, but that doesn't mean you're going to get out. We've seen too many times in multiple sporting competitions where the favourite for the group is going home early. I think you remember FIFA World Cup 2010 where France, succumbed in the group stage. So I think it's something that you've got to make sure you tick the boxes. And that England side under Borthwick has just been concise and organised. I think that's what you could say to them. They don't give you many mistakes. They don't give you an opportunity to turn over the ball. And that's where they're so good. They're just organised, disciplined, and they don't give you any options. So you've got to almost manufacture something from the open play to try and shift the momentum of the game in your favour.
I love what you mentioned there, ticking the boxes. As we move over to the fourth quarterfinal, the Springboks ticked the box by just 1 point.
Yeah.
There's so much for us to talk about, but the one thing that the French media, the French fans, and even to a certain extent South African fans were asking themselves a few questions about was the officiating on the day. And specifically, Eben Etzebeth. I want to talk about him.
Yeah.
Did Eben Etzebeth actually get a little bit lucky on the day?
I think it could have gone either way with that interception. It wasn't really an interception, but he interrupted play. The idea for World Rugby is that you're not negative in your play. You're not intentionally breaking down the flow of a move. And in that moment, he managed to kind of flick it back as opposed to knock it down or knock it forward. And that's, I think, what they want, is that at least he's trying to get the game to continue, maybe in the opposite direction, but it's not intentional breakdown of play. And otherwise, he would have received the yellow card for it. So yes, a bit of fortune going his way, but you kind of need some luck to go your way.
Especially in a big knockout tournament like a Rugby World Cup, you need a little bit of fortune. And for us, that 1 point was vital. I want to talk about the manner in which South African rugby has adapted over the years, because we've almost moved away from the traditional set piece type of rugby where we want to slow the game down. I saw the Springboks on Sunday playing counter-attacking rugby, finding an opportunity, and then you see Kurtley Arendse, Cheslin moving through the gaps and scoring tries, vital tries at that. How has South African rugby adapted, at least in your mind? Because one would have said that, yes, we now know how the Springboks are going to play, but it seems that there's tons of variation to their game.
I think it comes from where you decide you're going to find points. Are you going to go through the threes, as we had, if you look back to 2007 with Percy Montgomery, that was a guaranteed three almost every time we opted for it. So then you have faith in that ability. But I think what South Africa have had to do is add elements to their game, because if you're found short when plan A and B don't work, where do you go? Because if those two aren't working, particularly against sides that physically we've kind of been matched, particularly I think the All Blacks. So you've got to have another element of your game, and that's the brilliance of Jacques Nienaber and Rassie Erasmus. They've just added more and more and more tools to our toolbox to be able to say, okay, if these plans don't work, how do we change it? And if they do work, how do we amplify it?
You talk about amplifying your game, amplifying your skill set. The French went into this one being the favorites, being the home favorites, one has to say. Where did they get it wrong? Or is it also a case of the last 20 minutes and being able to adapt in vital moments? Because there was a point where South Africans were genuinely nervous and we felt that this one was slipping away. They grew in confidence, but when you look at the result, it says a completely different story.
I don't know if they lost it so much as South Africa found that extra little bit to win. I think it was a very even contest, and that Eben Etzebeth try where he was dragging, French players like children, it really showed the desperation that the Springboks have. I think the French, one of the pundits before the game was saying, the French have been told this is their World Cup to win. This is their best opportunity for a long time. They have this opportunity in front of them to win. And in that moment, you may become slightly complacent and you're not as desperate as your opposition. South Africa have had to fight for every morsel in this World Cup, and again, they came to the party when it needed.
You talk about coming to the party. I want to shine a spotlight on a player that's had a little bit of extra pressure heading into this Rugby World Cup, also given his performances that we've seen. A man that was trusted with the number 10 jersey, Manie Libbok. We saw him make a mistake on the day against France. That's a player that many South Africans doubted. At least in my honest opinion, I felt that rather have Handré Pollard start the game. I trust him because I've seen what he's done. Yes, we've seen the flair from Manie Libbok, but in a knockout game, I need to know that I can trust you 100%. Have you been satisfied with what you've seen from Manie Libbok? Because we're also keeping one eye on the semi-final. Jacques Nienaber, Rassie Erasmus have said that we trust you to don the number 10 jersey. Are you happy with that decision?
Absolutely. I think Manie Libbok's ability to read the game and find gaps and turn South Africa's counter-attack into try-scoring opportunities is what's the difference. I think South Africans sometimes, like you mentioned, an older style of play is rather be conservative, let your 10, kick it out or perhaps just hammer them with the line out consequently to that. But what Mani Libbok does is he is that extra element to our game. He's that next tool in the toolbox, because what he does is he says, I'm going to employ our wings, I'm going to put pressure on the opposition through high balls, I'm going to change the game with the way that I play. It's not a traditional 10 where you maybe think he's a little bit more conservative or he's trying to boss the game from a structure perspective. Mani is almost like a cat amongst the pigeons. He just doesn't allow you to think, I know what's coming next.
Let's shift our attention to the semi-finals that lie ahead. As usual, this is where we start betting and start predicting what would happen. So I gave you 500 for the United Rugby Championship.
Okay.
I want to up the stakes. I want to give you 1,000 Rand. And I would love for you at home to play along as well. 1,000 Rand heading into the semi-finals. Friday night, we'll be seeing the first semi-final being played. That is the mighty All Blacks taking on Argentina. First question, what do Argentina need to do right on the day to be more competitive against the All Blacks? Because we saw that the All Blacks generally dominated them in the Rugby Championship building up to the Rugby World Cup. So one would say this is easy money. Just put all your money on the All Blacks. It's a foregone conclusion. You'll be smiling all the way to the bank. Would you agree with that sentiment?
I think if Argentina are to succeed, it would be probably their best game of all time. I think we saw closest to South Africa's best game against the French. This has to be their best performance, and they've got to drag the New Zealanders out for the entire length of the game, and that's when they've got to try and, with their bench, make the difference. It's certainly an Everest for Argentina to climb, but it's one that they've been at before, and they will have learned from 2007 where they got the bronze. How do they switch a gear? How do they turn on and say, you know what, we were a little bit fortunate, now we need to step up because this is a massive game.
How much money are you putting on this game?
You know what, I would be a little bit braver and say 250 Rand on Argentina, because the return there, if they win, is going to be a lot bigger than an All Blacks win.
Fully agree. The last one, the big one, the Springboks taking on England. One would remember 2019, that Rugby World Cup, the final was this particular game. English fans will remind you that we've got something to prove. Take us through this game. The squad has been announced, basically the same squad. What do the Springboks have to do right in this particular encounter? Or is this almost like one of those games where we've seen Rassie Erasmus field the B team because it's a foregone conclusion? What are your thoughts?
I think this England side, like I said, they won't give you many opportunities to disrupt their game. And so through that, South Africa have to manage the situation in the first half. If they see that there's an opportunity to gain the ascendancy in the first half an hour, they've got to take it and really bury the English early on. I think that second half is going to be crucial. You see the opportunity for Fut-Afrique to come off the bench, which is probably a surprise to a lot, with Kobus Reinach starting and Andre Pollard. Again, it's those narrow margins at the back end of a game where we're more likely to have the opportunity to kick for three, and we feel Andre is the man to do the kicking. So we'd rather put a really big score up front and then make sure that we bury it in the last little bit. I think South Africa found themselves a little bit at 6s and 7s in the first half against France. It was kind of bang-bang type of rugby. So it's now up to them to say, we need to manage them in terms of not giving away scoring opportunities.
So you've put 250 on the first semi-final. I'm assuming you're going to go 750 on the second semi-final. The big question is, to which team do you give it to?
The heart has to go for the Springboks. It's too good of a game for you not to back the Springboks. Yes, the English have been as good as they have. They've been undefeated. But South Africa, you just got to go with your heart on this one.
Given your predictions thus far for the semi-finals, you are predicting an All Blacks versus Springboks final. Many South Africans start to shake when we talk about the Kiwis and we talk about the All Blacks. As you mentioned earlier, that's the team that has beaten us the most. Are you confident that the Springboks can beat the All Blacks in a final?
I have faith in Rassie and Jacques, and that's the crucial element. The ability to pull out something magical. We saw it in the final against England where they had that arrowhead maul. That's what I expect from them. They've got to pull an absolute rabbit out their hat. Not saying that the Springboks are that far off from the All Blacks, but I think that one moment of brilliance is what will separate the two sides.
You talk about one moment of brilliance. A lot of Springbok fans this week will tell you about 1 point. A single point can make the difference. David, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your predictions, and hopefully you make some money this weekend.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. As you heard from David, he's predicting that the All Blacks will have an easy task of just moving Argentina to the side and focusing on the final. The Springboks might have a little bit more of a tougher challenge against England, but it should be a done deal, which will then bring us to the final. The Springboks taking on the All Blacks. I would love to get your thoughts in the comment section. Also, remember to like and to subscribe and keep the conversation going on our social media platforms as well. This is the Fut-Afrique channel.